So hello guys, today I am going to report about the story of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. So to introduce myself, by the way, I am Nikki P. Laurito from BS Ed E3A. So to start up, let us know when period was Jane Eyre was published. So it was published in 1847 during the Victorian era, a time marked by strict social hierarchies, gender roles, and moral codes. The Victorian period was characterized by significant social change driven by industrialization, rising middle class power, and the spread of evangelical Christianity. So this means that Jane Eyre di ay is kanang written in Victorian era, kanang panahon nga kanang hugot bitaw kayo ang mga kanang quans about gender role, then ang mga kanang babae kay kanang gipadako nga magpabili lang sa balay, magatiman sa ilang family, then musunod sa kanang balaod sa katilingban or sa ilahang kanang komunidad. So pero ang kaning novel ni Charlotte Bronte kay kuan maragning sukwahi bitaw siya sa kanang pinaagi sa kanang pagpakita ni Jane nga usa ka kanang girl nga kanang nangita sa iyang kaugalingong kanang commitment sa iyang kaugalingon ug kanang respect pod. So here gahisgot nga women's roles were largely domestic and their legal and social rights were limited, which makes Bronte's portrayal of a strong, independent woman like Jane Eyre both revolutionary and radical for its time. So si si Charlotte Bronte kay murag ning portray siya sa katong kuan sa Victorian era about the limitation of kanang kaani sa mga girls ato nga panahon. Okay, so now let us move on to the summary. So Jane Eyre, written by Charlotte Bronte, is a Bildungsroman that traces the emotional and moral development of its protagonist, Jane Eyre, as she moves from a mistreated orphan to an independent and self-assured woman. So ang kaning Bildungsroman kay maura-ura ni siya novel nga nag-follows about the personal growth and development of Jane Eyre. So iyang journey from an orphan to an independent woman is kanang mo'y central to the story. Kanang highlights the major themes like katong class, gender roles, and morality in Victorian society, while also emphasizing Jane's quest about katong respect sa iyang kaugalingon, to love, and kanang autonomy, which is kagawasan. So that's it. Next, so the novel begins with Jane's childhood at Gateshead, the home of her aunt Mrs. Reed. As an orphan, Jane is subjected to emotional and physical abuse by both her aunt and her cousins, particularly John Reed. Jane's early experiences are marked by feelings of alienation and injustice. So here it describes Jane's childhood at Gateshead, where she lives with her aunt Mrs. Reed. So dari she faces mistreatment and abuse, making her feel like an outsider in the family. So kaning mga early experiences ni Jane kay nag-shape sa iyang kaugalingon and her kanang determination to fight against katong unfair treatment. And after katong a confrontation with John Reed, ning confront si kaning Jane Eyre sa iyang aunt about ni John Reed. So mao to iyang aunt, she is sent away to Lowood School, wherein a school of unorphaned girls. So she is treated as an outsider, unworthy of kindness or familial love, which begins to shape her strong sense of self-respect and moral fortitude. After an altercation with John, Mrs. Reed sends Jane away to Lowood School, an institution for orphaned girls. So, as what I said earlier, paghuman og kanang confront ni Jane to Mrs. Reed, gisend siya away to Lowood School, which is a school for orphaned girls. So next. So Lowood offers little reprieve from the hardship Jane has known. The school, run by the hypocritical Mr. Brocklehurst, is characterized by harsh conditions, inadequate provisions, and strict discipline. Despite the hardships, Jane finds solace in two important relationships: her friendship with the saintly Helen Burns and her bond with the compassionate Miss Temple. So Helen's strict acceptance of suffering and belief in a higher moral order influences Jane's own religious views, but it is Miss Temple who nurtures Jane's intellect and ambition. After Helen's death from illness and the exposure of Mr. Buckerball's cruelty, conditions at Lowood improve. So this means kanang Lowood is not a pleasant place for Jane daw, because she witnesses the lack of kanang food, harsh discipline, ug katong difficult conditions under ni Mr. Brocklehurst, which is the hypocritical leader. Then despite ato kanang Jane finds comfort in her friendship with Helen Burns and in the kindness of Miss Temple. So si Helen Burns mo'y kanang nagtudlo niya of love, and then si Miss Temple kay kanang gitudloan siya bahin sa kanang mga about sa kanang how to improvise ourselves jud moto yung gitudlo ni Jane. So after namatay si katong Helen Burst kay murag nawala na sa katong si Mr. Brocklehurst, murag nagpalayo na sa siya, and then moto nag-improve na ang Lowood School. So Jane eventually becomes a teacher at this school, but after several years, she yearns for a broader life experience. Jane's next chapter unfolds at Turnfield Hall, where she becomes the governess for Eyre, the ward of the enigmatic Mr. Rochester. It is here that Jane begins to experience a new kind of life, one marked by mystery and emotional complexity. So despite the difference in their social status, Jane and Mr. Rochester develop a close, sometimes tense relationship. Mr. Rochester's brooding nature, combined with the mysterious events occurring at Turnfield, creates an atmosphere of intrigue. So here, mention nga si Jane, when she arrives to the kanang Thornfield Hall, she works as a governess for Adele katong bata. So a governess day, it is a woman employed to teach and care for the children of a household. So unlike a nanny, kaning governess, it might focus more on the children's physical care. They are responsible for their education, often teaching subjects like reading, writing, and manners. So in the novel, here, she is hired as a governess to teach Adele, the ward of Mr. Rochester. So, if you are a bit confused about Mr. Rochester, so, din siya. He is the master of Thornfield Hall, where Jane works. So, he is wealthy, complex and brooding character with a mysterious past. Nani siya dark secret. So, let us delve it later na lang. So, despite being Jane's employer, si Mr. Rochester, he begins develop a close and emotional relationship with her. So mauto, despite sa ilang kalainan sa ilang social status, they grow close daw together. So bisag si Jane naka-encounter siya strange occurrences niya, na intrigue pud siya. Despite ato tanan, she accepts Mr. Rochester's marriage proposal. So ultimately, Mr. Rochester proposes to Jane, and despite her reservations about their social inequality, Jane accepts, believing she has found love and a sense of belonging. However, it takes a dramatic turn on their wedding day when it is revealed that Mr. Rochester is already married. His wife Bertha Maston is hidden away in the attic, suffering from madness. So this revelation shatters Jane's dreams, but she refuses to become Mr. Rochester's mistress. So despite his pleas, her moral integrity and sense of self-respect lead her to leave Turnfield, choosing loneliness over compromising her principles. So diri na reveal na nga sa on their wedding day, na-reveal na ang dark secret ni Mr. Rochester, which is he has a wife, which is Bertha Mason. Nya, kani si Bertha Mason is mentally ill and has been hidden away in the attic of Turnfield, which complicates his relationship with Jane daw. So, then after the revelation, si Mr. Rochester is kaining please ni Jane to stay, but Jane chooses to leave, then unwilling siya to compromise her principles. So after leaving Turnfield, Jane is taken in by the Rivers family, Saint John, Diana, and Mary. So Saint John, a clergyman, offers her a job as a teacher at a local village school. Then despite her emotional turmoil, Jane begins to rebuild her life, developing a new sense of independence. Saint John, a man driven by religious duty, proposes to Jane, asking her to join him as a missionary's wife in India. So though Saint John's proposal appeals to Jane's sense of duty, she refuses, recognizing that marrying him would mean sacrificing her emotional and personal fulfillment. So after leaving the Turnfield, so Jane is taken in by the Rivers family daw. She works as a teacher sa usa ka baryo or village. Then kanang she begins to rebuild her life despite her emotional suffering last katong sa relationship with Mr. Rochester. Then nagsugod siya o kanang usab sa iyang kinabuhi bisag kanang sakit bitaw iyang kaagi. So si Saint John River kay he is kanang a pastor ni siya niya nita kanang clergyman. And then nagpropose ni siya ni Jane na sad, then kanang asked her to accompany him to India as his missionary wife. Then nya hangyo siya ni Jane nga kanang ubanan siya sa India isip kanang asawa niya. Then pergipili ni Jane nga kanang dili siya andam nga kanang dili siya andam nga isakripisyo ang iyang kanang personal nga kanang kalipay para lang sa religious duty ni Saint John. Yes, that's it. So in the end, Jane returns to Turnfield to find that the mansion has been destroyed in a fire and Bertha has died. Mr. Rochester, who was injured in the fire, has lost his sight and a hand. Jane's return to Mr. Rochester marks her emotional and moral triumph. So after ato sa Rivers family, si Jane kay ning balik siya, she returns to Turnfield kanang to find the mansion burned down, and si Bertha katong wife ni Mr. Rochester kay namatay. Then Mr. Rochester has been injured in the fire. Nya, he lost his sight and a hand. So si Jane decides to marry Mr. Rochester, not because of obligation but as an equal partner. So in love din ni si Jane ni Mr. Rochester kay ning balik man siya. So their marriage symbolizes Jane's achievement of true love and kanang autonomy, which is kagawasan. So since we're done with this summary, let us now proceed to the main characters in Jane Eyre story. So first, we have Jane Eyre, the protagonist, whose journey from a mistreated orphan to an independent woman, morally strong woman, is the core of the novel. So Jane's resilience, intelligence, and self-respect make her a pioneering figure in literature. So si Jane Jude is the main character of the story, and her journey is one of self-discovery and independence. which describes that she is strong, intelligent, and kanang she values her own principles. So next character we have Mr. Edward Rochester. So he is the brooding, enigmatic master of Turnfield Hall. Rochester is complex, haunted by his dark past and the secret of his marriage to Bertha Mason. He falls in love with Jane and represents a challenge to her moral integrity. So, kani si Mr. Rochester, he is a complex character. So, he's dark, passionate, and hiding a secret marriage to Bertha Mason. So, his relationship with Jane is filled with tension, but he kanang respects her independence and intellect, which makes him different from other male characters of that time. So the third character we have St. John Rivers, a clergyman who takes Jane in after she flees Thornfield. St. John is cold and duty-driven, representing an alternative to the passion and emotion Jane finds with Mr. Rochester. So, kani si St. John, sa akong nahisgutan ganina sa summary, kay kanang he represents a kanang duty and religion without passion. So, he offers Jane a life of service, katong as a missionary wife, but kanang Jane declines because kanang she realizes it would mean sacrificing her happiness and love for duty. Moto siyang refuse si Jane. So the fourth character we have Bertha Mason. She is Mr. Rochester's wife who suffers from mental illness and is confined in the attic of Thornfield. Her presence is symbolic of Rochester's hidden sins and the repression of darker human impulses. So, kani si Bertha Mason, she symbolizes the hidden, darker aspects of society. She was locked away because of her mental illness, and kanang she represents how Victorian society treated those kanang who didn't fit their mold. So, Bertha's role also adds to the gothic mystery of the story. So next we have Helen Burns. So Helen Burns is Jane's close friend at Lowood, whose calm acceptance of suffering and death shapes Jane's understanding of faith and morality. So, kani si Helen Burns, she is one of Jane Eyre's important friend at Lowood School. She is a student known for her humility and calmness in the face of she faced hardships at the school. So, her principles of submission and suffering deeply influenced Jane's religious views. Then, unfortunately, Helen dies of illness. And the last character we have Mrs. Reed. So Mrs. Reed was Jane's cruel aunt, who raises her at Gateshead and treats her with disdain, reinforcing Jane's sense of isolation and struggle for self-worth. So kani si Mrs. Reed, she is Jane's aunt who takes care of her after Jane's parents die. So Mrs. Reed shows no love towards Jane and katong treats her as an inferior to her own children. So siya sad ni ang send ni Jane away to Lowood School, the school of an orphan girls, after the conflict between Jane and her cousin John Reed. Then her mistreatment of Jane strengthens her to resolve to stand up for herself. Okay, so now let us move on to the themes of the novel. So, the first theme we have social class and inequality. So, throughout the novel, Jane navigates the rigid social hierarchies of Victorian society. As an orphan and governess, she occupies a liminal social space, but her intelligence and integrity allow her to transcend her class boundaries, particularly in her relationship with Mr. Rochester. So, one of the biggest themes in the novel was the social class and inequality. It is because Jane as a governess is seen as a inferior in the eyes of society, but Charlotte Bronte shows that she is equal if not superior, in moral strength and intellect to the wealthy character where kanang gipakita ni Bronte nga kanang si Jane is kanang patas o kanang labaw pa siya sa uban nga kanang paspas o kanang kaisipan. So next we have gender roles and independence. So Jane Eyre's struggle for independence and equality reflects Bronte's challenge to the Victorian ideal of womanhood, which confined women to passive domestic roles. Jane's insistence on self-respect, even in love, is a radical stance in the context of her time. So why gender roles and independence? So katong the novel questions the kanang traditional roles of women man. So Jane defies societal expectations by insisting on her own independence and self-respect. So unlike sa katong mga typical Victorian woman, Jane values herself and her morality over submission to a man. Yeah. So the third one we have love versus autonomy. So a key tension is in the novel is Jane's desire for love balance against her need for autonomy. Her decision to leave Rochester, despite her love for him, demonstrates her unwillingness to sacrifice her principles and independence for romantic fulfillment. So here, it means katong Jane struggles to find a balance between love and katong personal autonomy or kagawasan. Although she loves kanang Mr. Rochester, she leaves him because kanang she cannot sacrifice her principles for love man. So this theme reflects the idea that true love can only exist between equals. So next we have morality and religion. So Bronte uses characters like Helen Burns and St. John Rivers to explore different religious ideals, contrasting Helen's passive, forgiving Christianity with St. John's cold, duty-bound faith. So Jane's moral compass is shaped by these influences, but ultimately, she seeks a balance between passion and principle. So meaning, kanang the novel shows different forms of religion through characters like katong si Helen Burns and St. John. So si Jane kanang murag na influence nila pero kanang in the end she finds kanang her own balance between morality and katong emotional fulfillment. So now let's move on to its cultural context. So it was published during the mid-Victorian period. So Jane Eyre addresses many of the social issues of its time, particularly the status of women, class relations, and religious morality. Victorian society was rigidly hierarchical, with clear distinctions between social classes. So as a governess, Jane occupies a peculiar social position. She is educated and refined, yet as a servant, she is excluded from the status enjoyed by the gentry. Bronte critiques these social structures, showing how they limit individual potential, especially for women like Jane. The role of women in Victorian England was also a central concern. Women were expected to be subservient, domestic, and morally pure, with little opportunity for personal or professional independence. Jane's journey reflects a struggle against these societal expectations as she seeks emotional fulfillment and equality in a world that denies her both. Bronte's novel was groundbreaking for its portrayal of a heroine who values her autonomy and moral integrity above social conventions. So its cultural context also talks about religion that plays a significant role in the novel's cultural context. So Victorian England was a deeply religious society, and evangelical Christianity, with its emphasis on moral righteousness and self-denial, was highly influential. And lastly, it talks about Jane's moral decisions are shaped by her religious beliefs, but Bronte also critiques the extremes of religious fervor as seen in the character of St. John Rivers. So to wrap up the cultural context, it actually reflects the limitations placed on women and lower class individuals during the Victorian era. So women were expected to be submissive, but kanang Jane defies it. This I mean. So the novel also critiques the hypocrisy in how society deals with issues like mental illness through katong ni Berta Mason, and the unequal treatment of women as seen in Jane's fight for independence. So I think that would be all for my report. So thank you everyone for listening, and with regards with my activity, I will just send it to the GC. It is Google form. So thank you so much everyone. God bless.